We all treat our money as our most valuable asset. But the thing that is scarcest is our time.
What are some of the things that you would do in an organization outside of just the structure of meetings that would increase the productivity of the organization?
You really have to just rely on your people, especially if you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
What is the biggest mistake you ever made in business?
Biggest mistake I ever made in business was in March of 2020 when I decided and announced to the company right after the pandemic that I would not lay anybody off.
Ooh, interesting. You basically removed the carrot and the stick.
It's a bad idea to take the carrot and the stick away. I think what hurt me most was not that the people who didn't perform well kept not performing well. It was the people that...
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Howard here with me. I thought a great place to start. You've taken companies public. You've got a great business today. You've been highly successful as an entrepreneur, but you have a bunch of productivity hacks, which sound like woo-woo nonsense. But you think differently about how to be productive. And then you have these hacks that somebody can watch this right now and immediately go implement and probably like 2 or 3x their productivity. So the first one is the idea of calendar zero. What the hell is calendar zero?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we all treat our money as our most valuable asset. But the thing that is scarcest is our time. Yet we dole out our time every time we allow people to book things up on our calendar. Mm-hmm. And so think of your calendar like it's your bank account. And it starts with, you know, completely full when your calendar is empty. And every time someone books a meeting, they're essentially taking a deposit out of your bank account. And people's calendars get filled up and clogged up, and we end up with, particularly in business, with people inviting us to all kinds of stuff, which frankly often is pointless. Mm-hmm. Pointless meetings. So there's a lot of there's a focus around a thing called inbox zero, which is how can I delete all the emails in my inbox. But what I've always focused on is to try to get to calendar zero. Now, this is not an absolute term. There's still things that are booked on my calendar. For example, this session today or a thing that I have to do, a board meeting. But I try to really minimize what ends up on my calendar. And when I look at my day, the less I have on my calendar, I think the better off it's going to be. In fact, the wealthiest people I know tend to have the least amount of stuff on their calendars.
Why is that? That's like a shocking thing to me, and I've noticed that as well. The most successful people have the least amount of things on their calendar. Here's
what successful people have figured out. Number one, you can accomplish a lot in a very short amount of time. I want to tell you a story about Teddy Roosevelt, my favorite president. There's a lot of great books written about him. My favorite might be The Bully Pulpit by Doris Kearns Goodwin. So Teddy Roosevelt used to hold 5-minute meetings. Now, I want you to think about a 5-minute meeting. And when in business you've ever scheduled a 5-minute meeting, no one would ever do that. There'd never be a 5-minute meeting on your calendar. But the president of the United States used to put people in a line. He'd have them line up. He'd have them come in, and there'd be a clock. And when there's a 5-minute clock counting down, you'd be shocked. The forcing function of time helps you accomplish so much. People get to the point right away. Decisions are made. You move on to the next thing. And so one day I was reading about TR doing this, and I was like, well, you know, if the POTUS can do this about matters of extraordinary national importance, I certainly, in my company, can do 5-minute meetings and learn about things that might be happening in our company and make decisions quickly, because the decisions I'm making for a software company in no way are as important as the decisions that were made in matters of national interest. So I adopted these, and we started a thing at Yex called Teddy Roosevelt meetings. Teddy Roosevelt meetings are an hour or 2 hours. People sign up for a 5-minute block. I might say travel to a London office. There might be 100 people in the London office. I would meet with all 100 people in 500 minutes. Here's how a 5-minute meeting works. Person comes in, sits down. I'm really careful to not make eye contact with the person when they're in the meeting, because I found that when you look down and take notes, people tell you more. So I'm, taking notes, and they begin to talk to me about what's going on. after 10 or 20 meetings, you get a really great sense of what's going on without doing these big 30 or 60 minute meetings and bringing a lot of people together. And so 5-minute meetings are an incredibly effective way to really become effective and get to calendar zero. It's funny, the original inventors of short meeting times were lawyers. If you've ever looked at your legal bill, you'll note that lawyers bill you in 6-minute increments, 1/10 of an hour. So they are clearly tracking their time and billing you in these little bits of, 6-minute kind of meeting times. So the other thing I've done is it's funny, each year when a lot of times when private equity buys a company, they take out the company and they try to take out all the costs. And so they have zero-based budgeting. 3G Capital is famous for doing this. And so they cut out everything each year and then you have to rebuild your budget back up from zero. They do that for money. I think people should do that for their time. So constantly I look at my calendar and I just delete stuff. So this is like doing zero-based time budgeting for your calendar. And one of the very first things to go on my calendar, and I figured this trick out a long time ago, there is an enormous focus in companies, and maybe you, Pomp, in your companies do one-on-one sort of weekly check-ins with your staff. Like we'll do half an hour with this person, half an hour with this person once a week. And when you do that, and I also like to have a pretty flat organization. So I might have in my company 15 or 20 direct reports. Now, if I spend an hour with every person every week, all of a sudden, literally half of your, 40-hour traditional working week is eaten up by these one-on-one meetings. Also, one-on-one meetings slow people down. So if you and I have a calendar time on the block and I need to tell you something right now, I might say, I have a meeting with Pomp tomorrow. I'm going to wait till tomorrow to give him this critical piece of information. So not only are you clogging your calendar up with one-on-one meetings, you're also actually slowing down information. So a different paradigm and a better way is to say, let's have no one-on-one meetings with people, but instead let's talk to each other as necessary. So if I need to talk to you, like I'm going to tell you, right? I'm going to come find you. And if you need to talk to me, my door is always open. Come find me. Let's talk ad hoc. Jeff Bezos does not do one-on-one meetings. He won't meet with people. He only will meet in small groups because he knows, number two, that in addition to slowing down information, one-on-one meetings that are recurring tend to become not work focused. And you begin to go into other places. I remember I was given this advice, always have one-on-one meetings with your direct reports. And I used to be sitting there and after like the third one, they tended to become kind of therapy sessions. And, like if you need therapy, like I'm not your guy, and a lot of times people walk in and I'd be like, how's it going? This isn't a one-on-one meeting with a team member. And they say, I'm doing great, fine. I'm like, are you sure? And they're like, well, I guess now that you mention it, I can think of some things that aren't going great. And there's just no reason to add that in to slow people down to do this. So I clear out all recurring one-on-ones with people in addition to having 5-minute quick meetings. I think ad hoc is better than recurring. Recurring meetings, I don't know if you saw Shopify. Just last week, Toby, he tweets, recurring meetings are a bug. And Shopify literally wiped all of their recurring meetings off the calendar. Now, think about, how many employees does Shopify have? I'm guessing
thousands,
10,000, let's say. How many meeting minutes do you think they saved from just wiping every single recurring meeting off the calendar? And
millions.
And their cost at Shopify is, their primary non-COGS cost has got to, non-server cost has got to be people. So they just increase their productivity tremendously. Now, some of that will come back, but wiping calendars, wiping your calendar clean, you'll never get to calendar zero. But I am a huge fan of trying to get to really, really short, crisp meetings. You can get done a lot when you have a little bit of time, and time is the ultimate forcing function as death, looks upon us.
So there's two things that immediately come to mind. The first is when I started to say no to meetings, I thought, or maybe it was in hindsight, I realized there's momentum to it.
Yeah.
When you start saying yes, you say yes more often. When you start saying no, you say no more often. And there's like a momentum to it for sure. And so I would say no, but. And the but was, but send me an email with exactly what the information is, what the ask is, or whatever, and I'll quickly get back to you. And what I found was not only did I save time for me and the other individual, but also I got the information in a much more digestible manner because they were forced to write it down.
Right.
And so usually what happens in these like kind of one-off meetings, not the recurring one-on-one meetings, but just somebody say, hey, do you have 30 minutes? I'd love to talk to you about something. Is they'd kind of come in and they would be like, well, there's this thing and then this thing. And then, oh, wait, I forgot about this. And oh, wait, hold on. You don't have this context. And they were like all over the place. But by having to write it down, it was like very clear. Like, listen, you're going to send me this email. This is the only context I have. If it's not in here, then I don't have that context. And so it made the quality of the decisions that I would make better as well. Right. So it was kind of a double win. And then the second thing was, on the calendar at the start of this year, I went through and I did this like huge calendar audit. Now, there's two types of audits that I've done. One is every week, the executive assistant that I work with, she puts together a report. And I got the template from Mateo over at 8 Sleep. I think he actually stole it from somewhere else, so I don't want to give him too much credit. But what we basically do is we go through and we categorize every single minute of my week. And we know what is for what business, what is what activity, all this stuff. And at the end of the week, I get this report and it tells me, you spent 10 hours doing this, you spent 20 hours doing this. And we try to make adjustments. And it's very clear, like how I'm investing my time is a direct reflection of what is going to happen. And so if there's a business that's struggling and I'm only spending 2 hours a week on it, well, we probably should spend more time on that, right? And vice versa. So that like week by week,
or you should kill that business and then spend all of your time on the one that's doing well.
Yes. So like literally we have those conversations, right? Of like, is this not worth spending any time on? So that's the week by week. But then at the beginning of the year, I did what I thought of more as like a macro audit. And when I looked at the macro of what I was doing, I realized the structure of my day was off. And what had happened was over time, over about a year, I had gotten what I call morning creep. So I know myself in that when I write, when I think, when I am most productive is in the morning. And so from the time I wake up to about 11 or 12 o'clock, I will put myself up against anyone. I can be hyper productive. Right. And I can think very clearly, and that's the best time I write. But over the last year, I started to take meetings at 11, 10:30, 10, 9:30, 9, to the point where I was taking meetings at 8 a.m. And so we basically just went back to the drawing board and we said, okay, basically the zero-based time budget. How do I want to spend every hour of the day? And rather than go to calendar zero, we actually did it, try to get to the same thing, but we did it a different way. We blocked the times. So from 8 to 11, no meetings, no calls, right? And we've done it in a way where like everyone knows he is doing X during this block of time. Then from 11 to 2, there's a block of time. And then 2 to 4 is when I'll take the meetings or the calls. And so when you kind of do that, what it also does is it forces everyone in the organization, like, damn, he's only going to spend 2 hours meeting with anyone in the organization today. Is it really worth 5 minutes, 30 minutes of that 2 hour block? And so what happens is you're pushing decision-making, you're pushing responsibility to everyone else. And from what I've seen so far, it makes the organization operate much more productively, but also it allows for people to gain confidence that like they can do things without having to come to you, I think.
That is absolutely true. People end up making more decisions. They get to the point faster. And, you know, the human brain works on chunking. The human brain works on being able to, you know, categorize things. And when they can categorize things at a higher level, that's the executive function that you want your team to be doing and making those decisions. In Good Profit by Charles Koch, I know you and I share this love of reading. And for those that don't know, Howard and I, whenever we're reading a book, we like take a picture and send it to each other. And it's always like a 50-50. I already read that one. Or like, when you get done, tell me if it's good or not, right? But in Good Profit, one of the things that I took away from it is they treat the employees like entrepreneurs. What that means is that they try to delegate decision-making down. The decision-making can only be high quality if everyone is aligned on what the vision is, right? So this is where we're all going. You're a talented person. Help us get there and make the decisions that will do that. But then they also compensate people on a kind of a commensurate perspective as well. And they say, look, if you deliver a certain amount of value to the business, you are going to get paid more than if you deliver less value.
And so how do you structure both Yext, which you took public, and then you've got a new business, Rome? How do you think about this like delegation of decision making, but also then compensating people based on value they create?
Right. Well, there's a lot packed into that question. Let me just go back 30 seconds and say, I was really glad to hear you talking about working your day. We just got through the new year and everyone asked me, what are your New Year's resolutions? And frankly, I do not have New Year's resolutions. I have not made New Year's resolutions in a very long time. I make adjustments constantly. And, at the end, it just so, sort of December 31st or January 1st just so happens to be like a random day. But what I do try to focus on, instead of making annual goals, which everyone has annual goals, but you try to focus on the daily routine. And if you can build a great daily routine, then I believe the longer term outcomes can happen in a better way. So I'm not a morning person. You're a morning thinker. I mean, I know because you're up so early and we're all getting your emails and stuff early in the morning. I'm a night thinker. But I try to build my day so that I do something physical, so I do something intellectually challenging. So I take a Mandarin lesson probably 3 times a week, that kind of thing. And then, once I've done those 2 things, then I feel like I'm ready to take on anything. So I think instead of for people focusing on their annual goals, focusing on their daily routine is how the Stoics would do it. And being able to build that up. And it's funny also because you blocked off your time. I think the analogy there, going back to sort of time being money, would be just like that's how you've chosen to allocate your investment portfolio. And you've said, okay, I'm taking, this particular piece of my investment portfolio, which is my time, and saying I'm going to put that in, I'm just making this up, in the S&P 500, which would be one part. Another part would be, allocated like this. So, smart people, the most successful people I know, think about their time just like you just said, which is we're going to allocate it like it was our portfolio. And we're different asset classes and, different parts of the time are worth different parts. But the way they think about it is totally by morning, by time, when they know they're most productive, least productive. And so all that kind of stuff. Now, shifting gears to your next question about Charles Koch and, his market-based management philosophy, I think is what he called it. He even registered the trademark on it. So I'm nervous that I might get a lawsuit just by bringing it up in this conversation we're having. It was a great book. I enjoy reading about him. He really had a lot of advantages in starting a company. I don't remember the exact story, but I think his dad started the company, and then he and his brother took it. Basically his dad started it, and then they came in and they were like, hey, do you want to grow it? And his dad was like, we got a good thing going. And his dad passed away, and then him and his brother, took it to I think they're the second largest privately held company in the world now. Yep. What's the largest? Mars? Cargill, I think. Cargill. Yeah. Or at least in the United States. Cargill, I think, is larger. And it's estimated that Koch Industries, I think the latest number I saw was $125 billion in annual revenue. Yeah. So we talked about how they empower people and how they compensate people. And, you asked how we did that at Yext and how we do that at Rome. I mean, the one thing I've learned being an entrepreneur and going from 0 to 1 and beyond, and now back to 0 to 1 again, is just when you're in different phases of a company's life cycle, you do different things. So when you're running in a $125 billion annual company, he's operating at such a high level that he's just trying to, focus on culture pretty much, and probably some M&A. But the fact is that running a private company, which I think is kind of the point, is a lot different than running a public company. I ran a public company for 5.5 years. I did 22 earnings calls. I did, dozen appearances on CNBC. And it's a lot different running a private company where you can take a little bit of a longer term focus than, having to explain to Jim Cramer why EPS is off 1/10 of a point, quarter-over-quarter due to currency fluctuations in Europe, which is definitely not my personal strong suit. So when you're running a private company, you're not accountable for that. So the way you compensate your people is totally different. When you're in a public, particularly in tech, you give out these RSUs, which is essentially stock in the company. And we can talk about stock compensation in a second because I have a whole philosophy on this too. But the RSUs, people pretty much treat them as cash. I mean, it's a way for a company to, give people an incentive. But the reality is that it tends to just be cash. Now you get them in the future and they invest in the future. So of course everyone wants the stock price to be higher, but when you're running a private company, if you get a piece of the profit or something like that, you're absolutely incentivized completely differently. And the company itself is not run on a quarter by quarter basis. I'm sure they look at their quarterly financials, but you are not doing things that, you're thinking about this quarter a lot. And when you're running a public company, you're definitely thinking about your sales this quarter.
When you ran the private company and then took it public, is that the biggest difference that you saw was like that quarterly earnings report?
Actually, no.
Okay.
The biggest difference between running and again, we're talking about the size here. So once you get to, I'm just making up a number, 100 million of recurring. At that number, you're a pretty big company. You can be public or not. The biggest difference, in addition to, the quarterly earnings call, is the investor base. So when you're private, your investor base is VCs and entrepreneurs, whoever you have in your cap table. And they share one thing. They all want you to succeed. When you're public, you learn quickly that hedge funds and even famous investment houses are not all long only. And the thing is, you don't know when you're meeting with an investor if they're long on you or they're short on you. Then it gets even more complicated.
They don't disclose that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Because they're not allowed to, or because that would then give away what they consider to be a potential edge in learning something?
It's funny, the way that the reporting works, I'm pretty sure you can see if people have shares, and if they've short your shares, you can't tell if they own your shares or they've shorted your shares. So it's an interesting kind of thing to be sitting there saying, are these people with us or against us? When you're private, everyone's with you. And it's either going to be a big outcome or it's not. And they're all taking that sort of binary risk. When you're public, it's, people might not be with you. And by the way, they might be with you for a minute. That's the other thing. When you're private, your VCs, they're with you for 8 years while they, kind of have the whole life cycle with you. People could come in for a minute. I had shareholders come in, they'd buy the stock, they'd, get in the stock, and they'd be there for a quarter. I'd meet with them. They'd say, this is great. Then I'd meet with them a quarter later. They say, we sold out, but thanks. We appreciate you, making us 8% this quarter or something like that. So they're in and out too. And so there's a lot of timing that you don't really think about when you're, a private company with long-term shareholders. There's not a long-term, there are long-term shareholders and you know who they are. Often though, those same long-term shareholders will own your stock, but then they also do complex stuff like loan it out to shorts. And so they make money on that too. So there's a whole weird sort of.
It's very complex.
Very complex.
When you start thinking about overlaying the productivity hacks of your day to the organization, what are some of the things that you would do in an organization outside of just the structure of meetings that would increase the productivity of the organization? Hey guys, I hope that you're enjoying this interview. Before we continue, I want to quickly remind you, I'm hosting a conference March 4th at the Miami Beach Convention Center. That's right, it's a big venue for a big event. On March 4th, I'm bringing together some of the absolute fan favorite guests from the podcast and this show, and we're going to debate ideas. The event is called LYCEUM Miami. The LYCEUM was the public gymnasium in Athens, Greece. That ancient gymnasium was important because it's a place where people from all walks of life came together to have a war of ideas. You were able to not only participate in the debates, but also people could sit and watch some of the smartest people in the world talk about important issues. That's what we're going to be doing on March 4th at the Miami Beach Convention Center. If you want to join us, go to lyceummiami.com or click on the link in the description, and I'd love to see you there. Okay, let's get back to this conversation.
Well, I think that it depends on whether you're pre or post product market fit.
Okay.
And pre-product market fit, it's super important to be very close to your customers. I want to be talking to my customers all the time. In fact, my new company, Rome, we have this Genius Bar where we engage with all of our customers all the time. And they can chat with us. It's like a support bar. They can come in. We offer them live support. If they're troubleshooting something, we'll show up to their Rome and talk to them about that. So I think pre-product market fit, the most important thing is to talk to your customers. And by the way, the vast majority of startups are pre-product market fit. They, even if they think that they have product market fit, when the founders have used their sort of sales muscle to close some deals, from people they know, that's not true product market fit. Product market fit, I think, is best described as when your ability to keep up with demand is limited. And so most startups are actually not there. So pre-product market fit, you need to be kind of taking in as much signal as you can from customers, which means observing, talking, tweaking things, seeing what happens, experimentation. Post-product market fit, for most tech startups, I'm talking about software here, it becomes all about go-to-market. And so that's kind of a whole different ballgame. And so, okay, we have a product that works. Now, how are we going to keep up with the demand? We're going to hire a CRO, and we're going to hire a salesperson. We're going to hire a vice president of sales. We're going to hire sales engineers. We're going to hire sales enablement people. We got to train these people. We're going to have a whole operation devoted to how to head of customer success, how to customer support. We're going to hire, analysts to be looking at all these different kinds of things. And so then the ballgame becomes much more about go-to-market. And that's an entirely different phase of the company. And it's almost like running a military at that point. I mean, it's like you have these pods of people, and you have, when you're pre-product market fit and you have a tight team, I'm just making up a number of 12 people, designers, engineers, you're all in there. It's primordial soup. You're using your creativity to come up with what is the winning formula that is going to get the most possible customers to buy, use and love and buy our product. Once you get past that, then you have to hire in like the generals and the colonels to kind of figure out how to put teams of salespeople together. It looks like the military because you're dividing up territories. Who's got this territory, who's got the Southwest territory, who's got Europe, who's got Japan. Then you go once you get the US, then you go international. So in terms of productivity hacks, it's you really have to just rely on your people. Because
just hire great people and then basically get out of their way.
Especially if you don't know what the fuck you're doing. I mean, in my case, when it comes to scaling go-to-market, like I legitimately don't know what I'm doing there. So I wanted to find great people, and I did that with hiring Jim Steele and Dave Rudnitsky, who ran sales at Salesforce. Jim was the president of Salesforce. Dave was right with Jim and running that. And so those guys came over to Yext and helped us build out a real Salesforce, real professional Salesforce. In fact, if you read Mark Benioff's book, Behind the Cloud, there's an article, a whole chapter about Dave and Jim. So, it's funny though, because all the advice you get as an entrepreneur is you hire the experts and get out of the way. And I did that with our CFO. I hired Steve Cakebread, who was the CFO of Salesforce, and took them public in 2003. And so, got out of the way, but at the same time, you lose control. So you don't know how things work like it used to. When you hire your professional sales force, they get in between you and the customer, not intentionally, but that's just what happens because it's the size and scale. And so
how do you manage that? You're hiring these experts, you're deferring to them, but ultimately you're still responsible. If things doesn't go right, or let's say the CFO made a mistake, like people, they're like, okay, the CFO made a mistake, but like you're the CEO of the business. So how do you kind of give them the space to run and do what they do best and be an expert, but also kind of have the controls in place, whether it's on the financial side, sales side, whatever, where you still feel like you kind of understand what's happening?
First off, don't hire a CFO that's going to make a mistake. You don't want your CFO to make a mistake. You can have your salespeople make a mistake. You don't want general counsel or CFO to make a mistake. They don't get to make a mistake. They fortunately have, a controller, auditors, and then they have auditors that are looking at their work to double check it. And then they even have auditors that are auditing the auditors, internal audit, making sure that they also are not making a mistake. You can make mistakes in sales, you can make mistakes in R&D, but just don't make a mistake when it comes to financial reporting. And there's all kinds of things to make sure that is unlikely to happen. But putting that stuff in, putting those controls in, slows you down. It changes your business. You don't, when we started early days at Yext, we used to do these we would do all kinds of deals to win customers, and they'd look different, and they're, different payment terms, all different types of structures and stuff. You have to standardize. And so standardizing gives you those controls, but it at the same time slows you down.
When you start to see the meetings, and then you start to see the organization, you're hiring the right people. What is the biggest mistake you ever made in business?
The biggest mistake I ever made in business was in March of 2020, when I decided and announced to the company right after the pandemic that I would not lay anybody off.
Ooh, interesting. So that was like a pride thing in terms of, I don't want to lay anyone off, so let me say it and I'll force it into reality, or what was going through your head?
We had 1,500 people, pandemic hit, you have all these media reports of, and again, you have to go mentally back to COVID March of 2020, not where we are today. Complete uncertainty, pictures of people in New York, hospital beds piling up, Italy, everyone's whatever. So everyone's freaking out, total uncertainty. I announced to the company, we will not your jobs are all safe. We will not lay anybody off. You will, we're not going to give anybody a raise this year. So everyone's salary is going to stay flat year over year. But in return for that, it seems like the human thing to do right now is to guarantee you all your jobs and your health insurance during a pandemic. I'm not going to put anybody out in the street. Mm-hmm. And at the moment I was lauded, everyone was like, that's a great, the employee base thought that was great. Meanwhile, Airbnb laid off thousands of people, thousands of people. They later that year had a $100 billion IPO. Mm-hmm. And my big mistake was it turned out that in not laying anybody off and telling everybody we weren't going to lay anybody off, that it was a performance management nightmare, because a lot of the good people that didn't get a raise were like, wait a minute, I can go to a different company and switch jobs and get a raise. So why would I stay here? So your loyalty was not rewarded, number one. And then number two, a lot of the people that were poor or mediocre performers were like, woohoo, I can just do nothing and I won't get laid off. And so it gave people an excuse to do nothing. And
you basically removed the carrot and the stick.
It's a bad idea to take the carrot and the stick away.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
And so did you have to go back and correct it at some point?
You do correct it, and you have to correct it over time. Mm-hmm. It's not the kind of thing that you can do quickly. I think what hurt me most was not that the people who didn't perform well kept not performing well. It was the people that were the best performers that left, that mm-hmm. didn't show any loyalty, that hurt mm-hmm. me the most. Mm-hmm. Now, I will tell you,
losing
today,
your best people was more painful than keeping your worst people.
Yes.
The worst people are already dragging you down. So how much worse could they almost perform? Right. But losing your best people was a big blow.
It was the fact that they showed no loyalty. That I thought that, and again, not all the best people left. Some of the best people left. Mm-hmm. And when they would leave for a higher salary somewhere else, after we as a collective unit said, hey, we're going to protect all of our people here, we're all in this together, mm-hmm. we're one team, they were unwilling to share the sacrifice or burden a little bit. Mm-hmm. By the way, today, you see Salesforce laying people, you see all these layoffs happening. And mm-hmm. I just wouldn't have done that again. Mm-hmm. That was a mistake. It was a mistake because it hurt the best people and it may have saved some of the worst people, but ultimately it hurt the company too much. Yeah. And I would undo that if I could.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When you think about Rome, the business you're building now, I am very proud to be an investor. It is, I'm going to call it a Zoom killer. I don't know if you're going to call it that, but describe a little bit as to, we moved to this remote work world.
Yeah.
Zoom works.
Yeah.
It's fine. I use it every day.
Yeah.
Why even think about going after an area that already has such a dominant player who is being positioned in the media and elsewhere as the disruptor? Right. So it's not that Zoom is some, 100-year-old incumbent company that no one's tried to take it off. They kind of are like the startup that just made it.
Right.
And you guys are already coming after them.
Well, let me just take a step back and tell you about what Rome is. So during March of 2020, when we were talking about, who to lay off and what not to lay off, I one day set up a Zoom. And when you run a big company or a small company, you're doing Zooms all the time. I put 100, and the bigger the company, the longer and more boring the Zoom tends to be. Mm-hmm. And you set up those calendar invites where you add all the people and you add their email address in. And I was setting up a Zoom calendar invite, and I think it was for 100 people, and I forgot to add someone. And when you forget to add someone to a Zoom in a remote world, that person does not exist. It's like they didn't know the meeting was supposed to happen. Nobody told them. They blissfully, ignorantly go about whatever they were doing, and they missed out. In the real world, if there was a meeting going on with everyone and a person walked into the office and saw all the people there, be like, oh, I'm probably supposed to be in there. Mm-hmm. So it was at that moment that I had this flash of insight, which was, well, what if there was a bird's eye view of all the meetings going on in a company at the same time that everyone could see? Just like in the real world, you walk into an office. I walked into your office here. I see it's a bustling office. There's people talking to all kinds of people here. There's, I see who's in, who's not in, who's talking to who, and I get a sense for what the heck is going on. Mm-hmm. We lost all that when we went to Slack and Zoom. Mm-hmm. And what Zoom did a phenomenal job, better than anybody in the world. Zoom was the first video conferencing technology that worked. And Eric rewrote the video codec. He didn't use the existing stuff in web browsers, which didn't really work that well. Mm-hmm. He rebuilt the whole codec from scratch and, famously left Cisco and that whole thing. So they solved the video conferencing technology problem. Mm-hmm. But what they completely failed to solve, or didn't attempt to endeavor to solve, was the workflow. And so what we have today is this amazing technology, but our workflow around it's totally broken. Things that used to take two people, 5 minutes in the office to get done right now. Hey, I walk Pomp. Can you help me with this thing? We do it. Like, we're done. Now is being scheduled for a Zoom call for 60 minutes with 9 next week. And so, and then the other thing about this that's funny is, when you're scheduling a Zoom call for 60 minutes next week, I put you on it, and it's like, well, I should probably be inclusive. I'll just invite everyone to it. And so you end up, this is the calendar clutter we were talking about before. The workflow is backwards. The workflow is broken. There's too many meetings. The meetings are too long. Things that, could be done right now are being scheduled next week. So it's slowing companies down. And so we invented Roam. Roam is a cloud headquarters. That's the positioning for it. Cloud HQ. It does 3 things. It makes companies, it helps them reduce the number of meetings they have. The average meeting time in Roam is 8 minutes.
Wow.
8-minute meetings.
Not down to 6 like lawyers, but we're getting close.
We're gonna try to get down to 5.
All right.
And I'll talk about more about the meetings for a second. Second thing it does, it makes companies feel more connected. 90% of people that use Roam feel more connected to their company. Mm-hmm. In a remote company or a hybrid company or even a distributed company, and let me be clear, Roam is not just for remote or hybrid companies. The fact is, any company that gets big enough becomes distributed. Yext had offices from Berlin to Beijing. Mm-hmm. We're all over the place. So we put companies together under one roof. Anyone from anywhere can see everyone and see who's meeting with who and pop around. And so this vision is this bird's eye view of the whole company, everyone in one HQ from anywhere. And then the third thing, and we'll talk about this in a second, about SaaS and my views on SaaS, we have a business model innovation. We only charge per active user.
So where most SaaS companies would say, you signed up 20 people, you owe me X dollars times 20 people per month in perpetuity, you say, no, yes, you signed up 20 people, but only 14 of them actually logged in this month or this week. And so therefore you owe me for 14, not for the 20.
You got it. And it's paid at the end of the month, as opposed to SaaS, which says you have to prepay us. You have to guess how many licenses you're going to need for this year. 50? Well, you're going to grow. Okay, 60. And there's a salesperson sitting there trying to upsell you more and more and more, 60, 70, 80. And then, okay, it's 100, bucks a year per user or whatever. You have to prepay that up front for the year. We say, we're going to do active user pricing. It's an all-in-one bundle. So we're going to include the ability to do chat and video conferencing, all this other stuff. By the time you add up the other apps that we can get you out of by using Roam, it's $2,000 a year for them. It's $120 per active user only for Roam. Mm-hmm. So we have a business model innovation here too. And I worry, by the way, a lot about other SaaS companies that have kind of a lot of unused licenses sitting around. As companies try to get more efficient, they're going to just cut that stuff out.
Of course.
Yeah.
If you're paying for something and not using it right now and over the next 6 months, there's a lot of companies trying to figure out where those are in the company.
It reminds me a lot of the Groupon breakage. Groupon would sell, 100 Groupons or whatever, and then only 30 of them would be redeemed. And that's how they literally that's how the merchants for Groupon made all their money. They could discount it so much knowing people would buy it and never redeem. Mm-hmm. So I worry about that in SaaS. You see that in SaaS a lot. Mm-hmm. But Roam, our ability to, and let's talk about meeting minutes for a second. So I said the average meeting time in Roam is 8 minutes long. Mm-hmm. And it's because when you use this and you have to see it, you're in this immersive HQ and it's a 2D HQ. You can see who's meeting with who. I see Pomp is talking to a designer and I know, oh, I'm supposed to talk to those two people about something. I pop in for 2 minutes and we have a quick conversation. It's serendipitous. It's ad hoc. I needed to tell you guys about something. And we may or may not be pre or post product market fit, but I'm able to have that conversation with you as I need to have that conversation with you.
So I've got the demo. I went, you showed it to me, and let me do my best maybe to describe from the outsider's view, kind of the initial experience was you can look and see, I'll call it a floor plan. You guys probably call it something else, but on a floor plan, what you can see is everyone has kind of their own offices. And so there's Howard's office, there'd be my office, so all the way down the line. And then there are conference rooms on this floor plan where multiple people can all meet, but you could also meet in one person's office. So like I could come to Howard's office, virtually knock on the door, you say, yep, come in, we talk, I leave, I go back to my office. Or we could say, hey, me, you, and 5 other people, let's go to this conference room and we move over. So literally like you would do in the real world, just now you're doing this virtual experience. And the kind of, I'll call it auto magically, all of the people's video feeds that are in whatever the one-on-one meeting or the group meeting, it just works, right? When you go into the room, bam, everyone's connected and like you can just talk kind of in that serendipitous way. Right. But then probably a little bit of showmanship on your part. You were like, hey, let's go to the theater. And I was like, what the hell is the theater? And you basically sent a message to your entire team and you're like, hey guys, meet me and Pomp in the theater. And everyone kind of virtually moseyed their way over and they end up in this theater section. And literally you could go on stage and you could hold a company all hands with everyone in the entire company. And then they also could react. And so while you were talking, I think they were throwing tomatoes at you.
Yes,
they
definitely.
were doing all kinds of different things.
There's a boot icon to kick me off the stage.
Yes, they could boot you off the stage. Like it's very interactive in terms of how it would be in the real world. And so what's fascinating about this is your comment that this is not just remote teams that are dealing with this, right? When I worked at Facebook, I don't know, I think I joined, there was like 3,500 people. By the time I left, there's 12,000. Yeah. Well, guess what? We would have meetings. There was one meeting that's like now this infamous meeting in the growth world where it was a bunch of growth people would come and a bunch of people from the ads team. And this is when Facebook 2014, like it just exploded. Right. And what we would do is we would have the people in Menlo Park. We would have some people dial in from New York, but we also would have people in London. So the London team, the New York team, and the Menlo Park team were all in this meeting together. And in the Menlo Park physical location, people were sitting at the conference room table, but there were so many people in the meeting that then there was benches around the edges of the room and people filled those up to the point where the guy who used to run the meetings, his name is Mike Kudak, used to sit on top of a filing cabinet. And like run the meeting, right? And that's how packed it was. But then we had all the virtual stuff. Right. And you could imagine this is way before anyone realized like, hey, you should care about the people on video. Right. Like it was kind of like the meeting was happening in the room and everyone else was just like kind of sort of there. Right. Maybe they would chime in when needed. Right. It feels like if we had something like this, that meeting would be very, very different today because you would now have the people in the room and the people remotely all interacting kind of a much more even playing field. Right.
You know, there's a lot of, the fact is any company that gets successful gets distributed. So, you know, it's not about 5 people remote or 50 people remote or 500 people. Any successful operation requires people all over the world. And that's what allows companies to go to market in different countries and different regions and have sales reps. People are in WeWorks, people are in, in the field, people are doctors in offices or retail stores. And, you know, you want to be able to link everyone in a company together in one HQ to make that company, to bring that to really bring that company together and help them feel more connected and be able to reduce meetings and stuff. But, you know, in the old world, it used to be that I would try to schedule a 60-minute meeting with someone. And now I can just go right over, see that they're available, knock on their door, have the conversation with them, and we're done. And you know, getting into hybrid for a second, there's a lot of opportunities. Let me talk about hybrid. I think the Zoom room concept where there's 8 people in a physical room and there's a TV with 8 people dialed in, like the Brady Bunch on Zoom, is fundamentally broken.
Why?
Because if we're all in a conference room and the 6 of us or 8 of us, let's say we're in there and there's 8 people dialed in and they all get a head on a screen, if I'm talking, my head always goes over to the TV. I'm always looking at the TV, even if you're right in front of me and I'm talking to you, because I want to make sure they can see my face. It's an awkward interaction. Now, it technically, again, this is an example of technically works, but humanly, it's a inhuman way to interact. And I think a better approach, just to give you an idea of something that could feel more natural. Well, actually, let me take a step back. That approach was designed by AT&T for the 1970s video phone, the original video phone for the World Fair. And it works really well when both conference rooms are exactly equal.
Makes sense.
Yep. So there's like 6 people around one side, 6 people around the other side. There's a camera, and we look like, a circle. But as soon as it becomes multiple people on the screen with different heads from different places, everything becomes kind of uneven. And so a more natural approach would be you and I everyone brings their own device to the meeting. Forget the TV, turn the TV off. You don't need the TV. You're in a conference room. Everyone has their laptop or their iPad, and everyone has a camera on their own face. By the way, think of the experience for the people that are dialing in the old way too. Like I can see like one screen. I see all these heads of other people that are dialed in, and then there's one screen where all the people are in a semicircle around, and I can't even see who's talking. It's too small. Like I can't figure out what's going on. So a more natural approach is bring your own device to the meeting, and you sit there and like everyone has a camera on them. So right off the bat, every single human has a camera and is even on the screen. And then when I need to talk, like I can kind of, if I'm talking to you, Pomp, and you're across from me, instead of looking at the TV to make sure that like the people over there can see me or whatever, or so I can see them, I just like look at you and talk. And I can look down and the camera is still on me. I don't have to move my head at all. I think the future of hybrid meetings is going to be people with their own device as opposed to a centralized big device where we all kind of have to look at it.
Yeah. How much of the like video conferencing stuff is actually screwing up companies versus it's helpful? Like, is it a net positive or a net negative?
Well, I'll give you an interesting fact about that, which is that the most popular meeting format by a factor of 3 to 1 in Rome is audio only. With screen share. So it's not just like, oh, I could call you. Sure, I can call you. But our offices are audio only. So there's an audio only room type. People pop in. I might need to chat with you. I don't need to turn the video on or whatever. Like and worry about like whatever. I just go, hey, Pomp, can you help me with X? And you're like, yeah, the answer is Y. Or did you think about this? And I'm like, well, hold on. Let me show you what I'm doing. Pull my screen up. You can see my screen. We're just chatting, audio only over. So audio only formats are 3x more popular than video on. And I think personally the default should be audio only, and video can be there as necessary, but it shouldn't be default video and then you can default back to audio.
The reason I asked that is it was like fun and novel at first, like, oh, video, like, oh, we're like on the computer, whatever. Now
look at my bunny rabbit ears. I can use the filter.
I hate the video because it's like, this used to be a phone call. Right. And then it became like a Zoom, which was default video.
Right.
And now I'm trying to, as much as possible, force back going to a thing to the point where I was like calling in, but then you can't see if they do want to pull something up.
Yep.
So you have to get on through the app or online, in front of the computer. But also then they know that your video is off because it says your name rather than number, like the whole thing. Right.
Well, like I said, we need to get back to technology that supports the workflow, not the other way around. And your what you were doing before is like we would talk to each other or call you as necessary. And now everything is anchored around Zoom technology, which is encumbering our ability to interact with each other naturally and therefore be creative.
You went to a very unique high school, Thomas Jefferson. Tell us about this high school in terms of when you were showing me the demo the first time, you kept introducing me to people on the team, like went to TJ, right? What's going on with this high school?
Well, there must be something in the water. I was really fortunate to grow up on the wrong side of the tracks in Virginia and then have an out in having gone to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, which is a STEM high school. By the way, I'm super pro STEM. And none of the companies I've ever created, whether it was Yext or Confide, which is a mobile messaging app I made, or Roam or anything else I've ever made would exist without TJ. And TJ was you got to go back to, and again, the 80s here. It's like Stranger Things. You're, riding your bike around the neighborhood. This is the era. Was founded in the DC area, I think in partnership with corporations, because there was a view of corporations, and again, these are government contractors, take Lockheed Martin, with the view that science, technology, engineering, and math was the path forward to make and keep, America, particularly the military, to have the most cutting edge stuff. And so in the DC area, you have all these government contractors selling to the government, the federal government. A lot of them live in Northern Virginia. And so this idea of TJ was incubated and formed, and it became the top high school in the nation. And the way that, and that's an objective measure, but the way that you got into TJ was pretty simple. In 8th grade, you took a test. It was a math test. And I'm pretty sure they just literally didn't look at anything else. There's no, it wasn't like there was an English component.
It was literally just math.
Was literally just, like math problems. And then they cut off the top, 4 or 5% of people that took the test, and they got the letter and they were admitted. And there was no interview process. It wasn't like if you were good at sports, you got in. It wasn't like if you excelled at the flute that you would, help build this, community of excellence or whatever. It was literally just STEM. And the consequence of that, Pomp, was you had this bubble of people that were not there because they wanted to get into Harvard, that were not there because they wanted to get to the best school and escape and have a better life and make the most money and become a McKinsey consultant or whatever people do. But they were there because they loved STEM. They were there because they literally, things like a supercomputer, which was pretty awesome back in 1998 when I went to high school, which was in our computer lab. Things like that got people going, and they would just hang out there all day. And so this vibe, I imagine it was a little bit like Stanford, 20 years ago. But it was this vibe of everybody just loving STEM and pure, with no, it wasn't commercially focused at all. It wasn't commercially focused, and it wasn't like a stepping stone to anything else. It was just love of STEM, whether it was robotics, whether it was computer science, whether it was mathematics. And so the people there were really self-selected for that and that alone. And I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of really, really, really great people there. There's been some notable alums. Vlad Tenov went to TJ. He's much younger than me, of course. There's other alums that have gone through there, but I met my co-founders at Yext and at Rome and at Confide at TJ. And it has continued to serve as a really tremendous recruiting bed for us in my career, where, we know if someone was a sysadmin at TJ, which is like the highest honor, like the students there ran the school networks.
Really?
It's actually funny. I had a call with the principal a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, I'm sorry, we can't use Rome. It's not approved by FCPS it's not a technology that's approved. And I was just chuckling to myself, all I had to do was ask a sysadmin, and Rome would be through the network in 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
But
Did you do it?
No, I didn't want to put anybody up to that. But here's what I did. They said, sorry, we can't use Rome. Can we use, the one approved technology from the school board is Zoom. Can we use that? And I said, I'm sorry, Zoom is not approved technology for us to use at Rome. So
what'd you do? A phone call?
Phone call.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense though.
Yeah.
When you think of a school like that, should we have more of them? Or is it important to have a couple of them that are, have the difficulty to get in, and you couldn't replicate 10,000 of them across the country?
Well, this is a hot button issue right now. And I am not a Northern Virginia school board political expert, but what I will say is that it does appear that they've changed the admissions process to focus less on STEM, pure STEM, and more on helping, people escape and get into a good college. Mm-hmm. And, the school was not founded to be a college preparatory institute. Like you want to go to like a good college, or you want to go to Princeton, I don't know, go to St. Albans. I'm just making this up. I don't know. But this place was like just a place to go and, learn about STEM and get into that. My view is that American exceptionalism is fundamentally driven by STEM, and that the reason that we have the standard of living that we have today is because of STEM. The reason we have, companies and all the things we have, this wonderful technology, the incredible medical capabilities. Of course, everything can be improved and get better, but what's going to make it better and what's going to make our economy better is absolutely, leaps in technology, right? And making sure that we recognize and have a system to recognize the people that can excel in that early on, and putting them together with other people like them early on is absolutely not just in the interest of the nation, but the interest of all of civilization.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like if we have smart people who are told that they're smart and are encouraged to try hard things, we probably will be better off.
You were preaching to the choir on that one.
It goes back to Koch, right? Like if you think of Charles's, one of his fascinations is around creative destruction. This whole idea, and it's top of mind because I just read the book, but if we are so big and so successful, we could sit back and say like, we're great. Yep. We're too big to fail. $125 billion of revenue, right. Like we're good.
Right.
But this idea of creative destruction is they actually view it as a race. If you're my competitor, I want to destroy my business before you do.
Right.
And if I can do that successfully, then that means that I have innovated. I've created a new product, a new service, a new type of organization, a new whatever, right, to stay one step ahead of you. Right. Because if I don't do it, you're going to do it.
Right.
And it feels like a school like a Thomas Jefferson, although it's not explicitly said, implicitly there's this go build things, innovate. Like you kind of, it feels almost like there's like a soft nudge in that direction. And then we kind of now see, 20 years later what the results are. It's like pretty impressive.
Failing is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Failing is key. It's funny. You mentioned creative disruption from Koch. Another book I read recently was Creative Selection. I don't know if of course you've read Creative Selection.
Ken Cosinda.
You got it. The keyboard. Thank God, by the way. Can you type on your iPhone really effectively?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you?
No, I think my fingers are too fat for it or something. I still struggle every time.
I don't do two fingers. I just do one.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Just now my thumb will probably fall off.
Yeah.
Like this is actually like a weird question. I don't think I've talked about this yet. Do your thumbs hurt at all?
They hurt more when I used to use a BlackBerry.
Oh, interesting.
Did you ever, you're too young for a BlackBerry.
No, I had the, my first, we had the razors and then remember the Sidekick? You'd slide it and you had the real keyboard.
Yeah, the T keys.
Yeah. And my thumbs hurt sometimes just from typing so much. And then the other thing too is if you had to put a score on the degradation of your posture.
As I'm sliding down the chair here.
Like literally
I want to sit up.
I was like doing something yesterday and I just happened to walk by this like mirror looking thing. And I looked and I was like, what the fuck?
Who is that guy?
Right. And I was like, and like immediately you like correct your posture. Right. But you're like, dude, come on. Like we're little, monkeys over the keyboard or whatever. So I think some of that, but Ken, his whole story is like fascinating because he basically was like, okay, how do we create a keyboard without the physical keys? We need to do it on this glass.
Right.
And the problems he describes in there are problems that most people wouldn't really think about.
Yep.
And like the big innovation was not actually the keyboard layout. It was the whole like auto text. Right.
The dictionary.
Which is fascinating.
Right. And what I took away from that was less about that specific innovation, but about the way that Apple used demos to bring ideas to life in a short, concise way. The demo for Steve was the ultimate sort of pinnacle of any Apple inventor or engineer's person of their career, but also the fact that when they were all in there together, greatness happened. And it wasn't, yes, there was the individual that came up with the breakthrough, but getting that quick feedback from people, other like-minded people that shared the love of wanting to make something great was the key to it all happening. And at Jefferson, TJ, there was that feeling a bit. And so when you're, 15 and you experience that, you can bring that forward for the rest of your life. There's a lot of TJ people at Apple, by the way. And in fact, the iCloud database at Apple uses a technology called Foundation DB, which was one of the first databases to break the acid test conundrum. And one of my high school classmates founded Foundation DB, which Apple acquired.
Wow. That's crazy. How many people do you think have built a successful company that were in your high school class?
My high school class? Well, there were 400. I would say 10. I would say 10 to 50. Yeah. 10 out of 400, which is a high ratio.
2.5%.
Right. I have a high bar for success.
Is that good math? Right. 2.5%. Right. Yeah. I don't do public math because you know how that goes. I've done too much public math over the years.
Well, it's better to run a private company than a public company. You can make mathematical mistakes.
Yes, true. What is the best 3 or 4 books that you've ever read? If somebody wants to get into reading, you and I share this love for reading. What would you say some of the top books are? Well, let's go 1 for 1. You say a book, I say a book.
Okay. So,
hey guys, I hope that you're enjoying this conversation. As you probably realize, we don't run any ads on this show. That's right. All the other podcasts, all the other YouTube shows that you watch, they have advertisers. We don't have any direct relationships with advertisers, and we simply create this because we enjoy doing it. Now that we do that though, we have a team. And if you'd like to support us, one way you can do that is to go subscribe to the Pomp letter. It's a daily letter that I write to about 235,000 people about my personal opinion on financial markets, business, technology, and Bitcoin. Just go to pompletter.com and you can sign up there. I'd love to have you join us, and it's a great, easy way to support the work that the team and I are doing on a daily basis. All right, let's get back into this conversation.
You asked if someone wants to get into reading. I wouldn't recommend this one for anybody who wants to get into reading, but it is my all-time favorite book. And I don't know if you've read it. It's called Gödel, Escher, Bach.
I have not read it.
It is by Dr. David Hofstadter. You might want to warm up to him a little bit before jumping into it because he can be quite tedious. But Gödel, Escher, Bach is this just insane book about how your mind works. And Escher was the artist that makes all these paradoxical images, like the hands kind of drawing each other, or like the impossible buildings where you walk up staircases that couldn't possibly exist. And a better book by Hofstadter that you might start with is called I'm a Strange Loop.
Okay.
That one you'd see in airports and stuff. And it really gets into cognition. He also wrote a third one. I guess I'm really going deep on Hofstadter here, called Patterns and Essences. And that one gets into how your mind works and how the human brain uses categorization specifically to chunk things together and reference each other. And so if you have interest in how your mind works, not at not like a biological level, but trying to understand the brain is the study of his career. And he approaches it in a perspective that we can kind of relate to. So I love Hofstadter. Gödel, Escher, Bach is this masterpiece. I might not start with that one, but it probably is my favorite book of all time.
Wow.
GEB, it's known as. There's a cult kind of following around it too among some nerdy people. So you would definitely like it.
All right. I don't know. Now I'm nervous. So I'm going to say 2. One that I know you've read because we've talked about it, and then one that most people won't have read. The Rise of American Growth is, to me, it's super dense. There's lots of charts and numbers and all this stuff, but it really highlights from 1870s to 1940s, give or take, literally the rise of American growth and how so much innovation happened there. And one of my favorite data points is airplanes go just as fast today as they did in the 1940s and 50s. There's been no real innovation in speed.
Right. The worst is actually we had the Concorde, right? That was faster.
Yes.
And we don't have it anymore. It makes me so sad.
Yeah, it's crazy. So there's that one's fantastic. Very dense read, difficult for some people to get through, but if you enjoy that stuff. And then the other one is the book we were talking about before. I was showing you in the office. It is laid out like the Bible. So just take that with a grain of salt. But 50 Cent, yes, the rapper, and Robert Greene, the author, wrote a book together called The 50th Law, a play on Robert Greene's 48 powers, or 48 laws of power. And in the book, Robert Greene goes through all these different things, and it's really about overcoming fear. Like that's the general premise of the book, but he overlays 50 Cent's life events on top of his writing. And so he talks about all these different details. And I've given the book now to a couple of different people, and like they're from very different walks of life, and they all come back to me and they're like, yo, low key, when you gave me that book, I thought that was stupid, but like that was actually a fantastic book. So I'm just going to keep beating the drum, and maybe Robert Greene will give me like a percentage of sales on that one.
Right.
What other ones?
All right. So I like to try to study people. So Doris Kearns Goodwin is, I think, maybe the best presidential historian. I'm sure you've read all her stuff. I mentioned Billy Pulpit, which about TR is the best. She also had a couple of others, but she wrote one on leadership that tied together TR and FDR and Lyndon Johnson. And I didn't understand, I knew obviously the relationship between the cousins, but I hadn't understood that FDR really helped Lyndon Johnson when he was a, I guess, congressman from Texas, and kind of identified him. This was like in the early 40s before FDR died, that in late 30s, as like a potential person that could be a president of the United States. Wow. And so that connection was not known to me. And so that was fascinating for me to read that. And it was interesting. By the way, she's got Lincoln in there too. So, she's well covered. Yeah. But it was fascinating for me to learn about that link, which was one that I had not understood before.
A Curious Mind, Brian Grazer,
of course,
which is a great one, all about curiosity and how important it is. I like to think that I, better or worse, am able to have the curiosity conversations, just publish them while he has them in private. But another book that...
and he's the guy that would reach out to people, just sort of, hey, I have nothing that I want from you except 30 minutes of your time.
Yeah. And I'd love to just talk. Yeah.
Right.
And he did it with, I think, former presidents. He actually, although it wasn't under the pretense of a curiosity conversation, he met with Fidel Castro with a bunch of like other movie producer people. And he tells that story.
Maybe he's using it as an excuse.
And he met with, obviously movie stars and all that type of stuff, but it was really trying to get and meet with people that are outside of his world. And one of them, I think if I remember correctly, in the 1980s, the riots in LA happened, right? And he met with the police chief like the day the riots kicked off. He just had it on the meeting. He thought for sure it was going to get canceled or whatever. He shows up, and like the way he describes it is like, there's a lot of police at the police station that day, right? And he still sits and he meets with the police chief, and he's like, it was fascinating because I saw what was going on out in the streets. I saw the news, and then like I just, by the luck of the draw, was able to meet with a guy who was like the responder.
Wow.
Right. And like see how he was interacting internally at the same time. So that one's always a good one. What else?
My favorite business book, and again, it's going to be cliche, is definitely 0 to 1. I think Peter Thiel just absolutely nailed every possible concept in there. I even kind of have some passages in my head. My favorite line in the entire book is, if you want to build a big business, don't build an undifferentiated commodity business. And when it's like, I think pulled out like in like a special phrase. And that whole kind of idea where, there's pretty much two kinds of businesses, those that are commodities and those that are monopolies.
It's true.
Yeah. It's better to be dealing with the antitrust people than to, be just chopping your prices over time. And that particular book, I think absolutely, encompasses so much. And again, we're talking about nonfiction here predominantly.
Do you read a lot of fiction?
Not really.
Yeah.
Do you?
I don't think I've read a fiction book. This is going to sound horrible, in like a decade.
So I read the Foundation series, which is a a sci-fi series because I saw Paul Graham tweet about it, and I was like, okay.
Was it good?
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I could get most fiction from watching Star Trek.
See, I'm going to get absolutely blasted for saying this. Never watched Star Trek. Never watched Star Wars. I don't really read fiction, like any of that stuff. I would say that.
Did you read The Fountainhead?
Yes, but like
in college,
years and years ago. I think the last fiction book that I read that I can remember like immediately is what are the 3 books? So when you join Facebook, Sam Lessin, I don't know if you know Sam.
Jessica.
He put together
the information.
And so he was at Facebook and he put together, or at least had a hand in selecting the 3 books that product managers would get. Right. And one of them was Snow Crash.
Okay.
Like, pretty telling, pretty forward looking. And there was 2 others. I forget what they were. But Snow Crash was probably the last like fiction book that I remember reading. And it was like fascinating. Like you join this place and it's supposed to be, this amazing company that's growing really fast and like all these things. And like they hand you fiction books.
Yeah.
And like it just like kind of spoke volumes, I think.
I think the one fiction book that I loved is Ready Player One.
Yeah. I watched the movie. I didn't read the book.
Oh, the movie was awful.
Really?
Oh, I thought it was, you might have liked it, but I mean,
maybe if I read the book, I would have thought the movie was awful.
Right. The other way that you're going to start to read fiction again, you're going to discover that the greatest author of, I think, last century was Roald Dahl.
Who?
Roald Dahl. James and the Giant Peach, all the kids' books.
Oh yeah.
Like Charlie and the Chocolate. The problem is, when your kids get old enough, you read this to them, and you realize when you get through the final book, you do the whole series. Matilda, Roald Dahl. You do James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, and then you're done. And there's nothing else nearly as good until you get to Harry Potter. Yep. And then, that's its own thing. But at that age, the genius of the writing and the storytelling. But I did worry a lot about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm sure you're familiar with the story, right? Yes. So you've seen that movie. Charlie goes, he wins the golden ticket. He ends up being sort of the chosen one. And Willy Wonka gives him the chocolate factory. And I thought to myself, like, Charlie's main problem is that Willy gives him this chocolate factory. He is worth nothing. And comes upon this chocolate factory that's worth, billions of dollars. Charlie can't pay the tax bill on that.
It's kind of like in Home Alone. What was the dad's profession? How did he have that mansion, and how did he pay first class for all those people to go to Europe?
Makes you wonder.
It's a big question.
Just a little bit.
I also was in New York recently, and I went to the Titanic exhibit, which you can take a guess. There was 2 people who went, me and Polina. I'll let you decide whose idea it was. But I enjoy going to that type of stuff just because you learn, right? And so we go, and it was actually like very well done. Right. They kind of have all these different stops, and they have a bunch of things, original pieces of the Titanic and pictures of people and like all the stuff. Right. But of course, when you get to the end, every single couple has to have the debate, like if Jack got on the door, like, would he still be alive? Right.
But didn't the director recently answer that and say there was only room for one person?
Well, I mean, I hear what he's saying, but I've seen a door before, and 2 humans could sit
fit through a door,
and then you get into the weight debate, and
bad debate.
Of course. I have 2 questions for you, and then I'll let you go. One, when you read a book, what is your process? Do you read Kindle, physical book, audio book? Do you highlight? Do you note take? What do you do when you read books?
Always buy the physical book, and I tend to buy more than I get to. What's the Japanese phrase? I forget the Japanese phrase that means there's far greater knowledge than you could possibly have. And so that's why when we look at and gaze upon a library, it looks beautiful to us because you see so much more than you could ever possibly hope to know. And that in a way is comforting. So I have a bunch of books that I don't read, is what I'm trying to say, from Amazon. And I try to order them, when I see somebody like you tweet about, like I bought Paul Graham, we mentioned him before. He tweeted about this book called Life in an English Countryside. And it's just like it's it's a historical book, probably written in the 60s, but it's about the medieval times in London and how the meals were served. And I have this thing and it's kind of sitting on my desk, like, and I'm thumbed through it, like I'm not going to read it, but I still bought it. So I keep a constant flow coming that is more than I could possibly keep up with. And I feel guilty when I don't read one, but that's good.
See, I don't feel guilty. I do the exact same thing. If I hear a book or somebody I respect or think fondly of, and they say something about a book, I buy it immediately.
Right.
And I have come to the conclusion that I don't spend any money on anything. Like I literally have a couple t-shirts, a couple pair of pants. Right. Like it isn't interesting to me, and I don't feel like.
But sorry, I don't feel economic guilt. It's not like, I wasted the money.
Well, but here's the thing is I have said to myself, the one thing that I will always spend whatever amount of money that I want to.
Right.
I don't care about dinners and this and that and all.
Right.
Books. I will always buy books. Right. And so I've bought a lot of books some months and some books I don't buy a lot. And I have two piles. One pile is I want to read the full book. The other pile is what I think of as the sprints. So there's like a marathon and sprints. The marathons, I'm going to read the whole thing. The sprints, I will say to myself, I'm going to read 10 pages of that book today.
Right.
And it may take me 6 months to finish the book or to finish enough of the book where I get the point.
Right.
But I'm reading it in 10-page increments where it's almost like a break from the actual book that I'm reading so that I can get a little bit of it, but like it's either too dense or it's not something I'm like super interested in or whatever. So kind of like the medieval meal book would be a perfect example.
Do you skip ahead? Do you ever skip ahead?
No, because if it's not good, I almost get to the point where I'm like, if it's just not good, I just stop.
Right.
Like I'm not married to the idea of I have to finish books.
Right.
And some books, like you kind of read and you're like, I don't know, maybe 100 pages in, 150 pages. You're like, I get it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Other books, you're like, man, I wish that they had, gone 500 more pages.
Right.
And so I try to find the ones where I wish there was more than the ones I'm like, okay, like I'm done. But once I feel like I got it, I just drop it.
I think this year I saw Lex Friedman tweet that he had like 28 fiction books he was going to read, like 1984, Brave New World, Brothers Karamazov. Like I did that like 10 years ago and I read pretty much all those. So that sort of encompassed my sort of fiction for a long time. And I did them all. They were all pretty good, except the Russian ones were just so tedious. My God, I could barely get through. Brothers Karamazov. I mean,
yeah. See, that stuff's just not like super interesting. Maybe I'm making a mistake, right? But like, I just haven't.
I'm anti-recommending it to you right now.
Okay, all right.
Definitely do not read it. Okay. It was just a long, tedious story with no point. Yeah. Now, of course, I mentioned that on Twitter and was scolded for misinterpreting all of the brilliant literature. And I'm sure there are many people who deeply loved it and respected it. And I am simply not an aficionado enough to have appreciated it, but I just did not like it at all.
Do you think that there's some people who are like predisposed to fiction versus nonfiction? Or is it like something happens in your life? Because
let's actually chunk this up back to Hofstadter. I bet the human brain is receptive to stories. And if you look at stories, they're the best way to pass information along. That's why even across, cultures in different places end up telling similar stories. And, you have these motifs in your brain. A great book that I loved was Carl Jung's autobiography. I don't know if you've read that. That was spectacular. And, he would get into the symbolism and get into this idea that we have sort of every human brain has figures. So whether or not certain brains are more disposed to that, I think all human brains are disposed to certain religious almost figures that appear in stories, whether it's in Aboriginal tribes, around the world, or Native Americans or English or Indian. Like you see the same characters kind of appearing for societies that never talk to each other. So that means I think we are all predisposed to stories and characters and these motifs that the best politicians figure out how to tap into that and use those characters and narratives and stories absolutely, is there something innate in our brain that is receptive to stories? No question.
Yeah. I just am not super drawn to the fiction. But like, here's the thing. What's crazy is the biographies and autobiographies, I absolutely love.
Well, those are stories.
Of course, right? But it's like true stories versus like the fiction stories. And then my maybe guilty pleasure is on YouTube. You tell me first what you watch on YouTube, and then I'll tell you what I watch.
Well, just like you don't read any fiction, I don't watch much YouTube except you, of course.
Okay, but you don't watch like any YouTube, no documentaries, no anything really.
Not really.
Oh, wow. So I am like obsessive about documentaries. Some of them are like actual, you and I would think of as documentaries. Some of them I've mentioned before that this guy, Phineas is the name of the YouTube channel.
Sounds like a separate piece.
I don't want to waste the next week of your life, but he does these like 20, 30 minute documentaries on great investors. So he's got Peter Lynch and Warren Buffett and all Warren Buffett's the recent one he did. And they're just like very well done because it's like obvious that this is somebody who's learning how to do storytelling,
right?
And he's not like some big production company,
right? So
it's pretty interesting. And then I watch a lot of interviews. So I've got I don't know, maybe 25.
Can I ask you, who do you think the best interviewer is?
I don't think that there's a best interviewer because I think what happens.
Well, can I ask you a different question then?
Okay.
What is the secret to being a great interviewer?
Listen. Just listen. Right? The reason why I say I don't think there's a best interviewer is because I actually think people, they have good days and bad days and they go through these like cycles. I see it even with myself, but there's episodes that I'll watch with somebody and I'm like, GOAT, right? Like that was amazing. They got everything out of that guest.
Right.
And then there's ones that you'll watch with the same exact interviewer and you're like, almost like a slow car crash. Right. And my conclusion on why that happens is because you can't evaluate just one side of the conversation. A conversation is give and take. There's two participants. And just like there's no good company culture or bad company culture, it's all about fit.
Right.
Where you could take one employee and put them in a company culture and another, one hates it, one loves it. It's all about like the match.
Right.
Same thing in an interview.
It's called Pareto optimization.
And so when you think about that as a dynamic,
right.
Now it's not about who is the best interviewer. It's actually about who are the best combinations of people.
Fit?
And
it's
so
like Paul and John.
Yeah, if you pull out like one of my favorite CNBC clips of all time is when Carl Icahn and Bill Ackman jump on live and they're yelling and screaming at each other. It's like that's like electric, entertaining television.
Right. What
is that equivalent when it comes to interviews? And I asked actually recently, I said, what's the best like podcast episode of all time? And I think the person I agreed with in all of the comments was Andrew Huberman said, hands down, not even close. Jocko interviewed this guy, Johnny Kim. I don't know if you've ever heard of Johnny. So Johnny Kim, I'm definitely going to screw this up, but he was a Navy SEAL in Fallujah. He was part of Jocko's team, I believe. He then went on to become an astronaut and then went to, I think it was Harvard Medical School and became an MD. And that all sounds crazy, right? Literally as a kid, I forget all the details, but like there was a broken home situation. And if I don't want to misspeak, but I think what happened was at one point, like the police, like I think it was his dad in the attic and there was like gunshots and like it was like a super screwed up childhood. And he went on to like all these accomplishments. And you listen to things like 4.5, 5 hours or whatever. And you're just like, that is an extraordinary individual.
Right.
And him and Jocko is not only a good interviewer, but also there's like a level of trust. They're on the same team, like the ability to talk about certain things, the shared experiences, all this stuff. You listen to it and you're like, man, this is one of the best conversations ever documented.
Right. It's funny. You mentioned CNBC. I once had to interview Mark Hamill, who I know you don't watch Star Wars, but is famously.
Yeah, I know who he is.
Okay. So, I'm sitting there, we have a conference. I'm like, well, how the hell, what do I possibly ask Mark Hamill, who, by the way, he's an easy interviewer and I'm the easy interviewee and I have no idea what to ask this guy. So I asked Carl Quintanilla from CNBC. I said, Carl, what, in your opinion, is the best way to interview somebody? And what is the key to being able to do a good interview? He said, you ask them about a moment. You ask them about the instant where they felt something or they learned something, because when you get to that moment, that's how people get into to their own head and open up. So I've always used that and again, I'm not an person who interviews people, but I use that, tell me about the moment when you realize something. And that really gets people going. So Carl told me that. Different CNBC Carl.
Yeah, but that's a great tidbit.
Well, it's all about moments, right? The moments, it's 5-minute meetings for Teddy. It's 8-minute meetings for Rome. It's 6-minute meetings for Lawyer. And it's the magic moment from Carl Quintanilla. I'm
going to mispronounce his name, but do you know who Nardwuar is?
I do not know Nardwuar.
I'm about to open up a whole world for you, my friend.
All right.
So he is a guy who, let me paint a picture of him. You ever see people pretending when they go to the golf course and they have maybe they have a striped pants on. They've got a really weird 1970s, almost wallpaper style, a golf shirt. And they've got one of the little hats on, right? And it's it's a look.
Right.
That's what he wears.
Okay.
Day to day. But he interviews the world's top hip hop artist. And he is lights out as an interviewer because it's not the questions that he asks. It's the work he does before the interviews. So he's been doing this for years and years and years.
Right.
And he will literally, in the middle of the interview, he will ask questions of the guest.
Right.
And they'll be like, dude, how do you know that? Who told you? Not oh, you went on Google and spent 5 extra minutes.
He finds something personal that really gets them going.
I told my best friend a secret in 12th grade. And nobody knows that person's my best friend, and you just repeated to me word for word what the secret was.
Right.
How do you know that?
How do you know that?
And they'll stop the interview and they'll be like, how, what the fuck, right? The other thing he does is he gives them gifts to start the interview sometimes. And they're things that I think he had Chance the Rapper maybe or something. And he gave him a vinyl record. But the vinyl record was of a previous artist that no one really knew Chance was a huge fan of when he was a kid. And it came from the exact record shop that Chance used to go to as a kid.
Wow.
And so you're just dude, that's incredible amount of work.
Right.
And then
it's when I bring Chris Harris to a dinner with you and he's like, I roomed with your brother in college.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the world's small.
Right.
But
by the way, if your name is Nardwuar, you're going to be famous.
Yeah. And he's just quirky.
Yeah.
So it's you almost set someone up to not expect a lot. And then you have this hard hitting, not gotcha type journalism, but more so just I did the work.
Right.
And I think people respect the shit out of somebody who does the work.
Right.
And so it's people like that. Right. I'm always on the look. So actually, if you are watching this right now or listening and you know of somebody who does stuff like that, just tweet at me, leave in the comments, whatever, I'll find it. But those are the people who fascinate me because they're able to get information out of people that just shows who they are as humans.
Right. Well, and that's what Oprah does, right? She gets people to really open up. That's the idea.
But it's it's on television.
Yeah.
Do they really open up? Do they really tell you the truth?
I guess Prince Harry did.
Yeah, well, in the book.
I don't know. I'm not going to read that.
Did you see the controversies?
I read about the controversies.
The two that I don't know, maybe weren't surprising or were surprising. Actually weren't. Was he was yeah, me and my brother fight.
Yeah. Wait, you fought with your brother and he pushed you over? Wait, how many brothers do you have?
Yeah, I have 4 brothers. Yeah. Trust me, that happens that still happens. Right.
Right. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. But that was kind of okay.
Yeah.
Then the second one was he claims that he killed 25 people at war as an Apache helicopter pilot. People are like, you killed people? It's he's a combat helicopter pilot who was awarded things for seeing combat.
Right.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that people, when they saw the headlines, they thought that he walked up to someone, pointed a gun and shot him. Right.
Right.
And he's no. I was in a helicopter. Yes, we still see people running and all this stuff, but it is a little bit different than, he's a Navy SEAL and he's whites of the eyes in the middle of the night type stuff.
Right.
So I don't know. It was just why do people care?
Right.
Let the guy live his life.
Let the guy live his life. But they care because he's making a big deal of it.
Yeah. If you write the book, I guess.
Yeah, he's trying to make money.
Yeah. Well, does he have to make money?
Yes.
Right.
He got cut off, right?
One of my favorite stats from last year is I did not know that the Queen of England or now the King gets paid $1 per head of every Australian citizen every year.
That seems about worth it.
If you think, and I looked it up before, but they've got a couple million people. And so like just that alone, like they're getting a $1 tax per person in Australia.
Well, if you tax people without representation, as they may have learned in the past, bad things can happen.
It's just a lot harder when you're all the way in the middle of the ocean in Australia and they live very far away.
That's true. They can't send people to Yorktown.
Yeah. But like vice versa, can they send people to Australia?
I don't think that those two countries are going to end up at war.
Yeah, but just like, what if Australians just were like, we're not paying anymore?
Wait, who pays who for this?
The Australians
is come out of their wages, like a federal tax, like it's like a line item, or is it just like?
I just know that somehow the king or queen gets $1 per head.
Australian dollar or British pound? I guess
that's a good question too. Yeah. But like when you start to think about it, it's like, what if the Australians are just like, no, we're not paying anymore.
We're not paying anymore. I think
would the UK really like
kick them out?
Show up? No, would they just like show up and be like, give us the money?
I'm not really sure how their whole system of government works, but does the Queen have to sign off on their prime minister in some way?
So this is fascinating too, because who is it? Ryan Holiday in his latest book, he talks about how the Queen has no power. Like the Queen does not actually make decisions. The Queen does not, whatever. And I guess not the King. So there's like a separate and distinct government function. But like no one wants to piss off the king or queen.
Right.
And so you almost have to like rule by influence rather than rule by authority.
Mm-hmm.
Like very interesting dynamic.
It's kind of like running a sales force.
I think a lot about the military is very authoritative leadership. Like you have a rank on your chest, I have a rank.
To do it.
Mine's higher than yours. Like do what I say.
Right.
There's authoritative leadership for sure in corporations, but there's a lot of influential leadership as well, right? Yep. That people kind of forget about.
Yep. Well, it's funny because technologies like Slack have shifted the balance from, and frankly, any technology that helps people communicate faster and better, I don't want to say undermines, but reduces the needs for authoritative hierarchies. Because if you think about something like channels, like Slack channels, like, anybody that wants to can make up their own channel and call it whatever they want and add whatever topic they want to it and therefore start a movement. So, it used to be that all communications from a company were top down. There's a hierarchy, there's a president and a vice president and a, area vice president. And, in a sales force, you have these layers. And, you'd relay the message down and no longer is that necessary to do. So, it's been interesting. I think in a military, you obviously still need that. In a tech company, it's interesting how few people you may need to run a big tech service.
It's a different world. Where can we send people to find you on the internet or find out more about Rome?
You can always find me on Twitter @Howard. I'm OG. So @Howard, and we also got @Rome on Twitter, but on our site it's ro.am.
ro.am
is the website, and then Twitter we're @Rome, and then you can find me @Howard.
I always enjoyed talking to you. I expect more book recommendations in 2023. I will send mine as well, and I'll do this again in the future.
Love seeing you, Pomp.